Hey, and welcome back. Always glad you're here. And today, I'm just going to jump right in because I think this conversation is maybe going to hit close to home. Maybe for some of you, maybe for a lot of us, me included. And so let me start with the question: when is the last time someone in your church told you that they didn't fully trust you? Probably never, right? And if they have, well, you should email me your story. I would love to hear it. But nobody typically walks up and says, I don't trust you. That doesn't really happen. Nobody says it out loud. They feel it, though, that they don't express it to you. No one sends an email to you and says, hey, Pastor, I showed up on Sunday. I sat in my seat, engaged, but only on the surface. I nodded so you'd feel better. But I kept you at arm's length, and I just don't trust you. Like nobody sends you that email. That is not how it works. People don't just announce if there's a trust gap, but they keep it. There may be a trust gap. It goes unannounced, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And that's exactly what makes this so hard, I think, to diagnose. We're going to talk about trust gaps today. Here's what I want to focus it kind of this way. The reality, right? The reality that you have already lost someone's trust before the Sunday morning service even starts. And here's the hardest part. This is why it's hard to diagnose. They are sitting in the seats of the auditorium of your sanctuary. They are attending. This isn't only the first time guest who is uber skeptical of church or has a horrible bad church experience. Like these individuals, I mean, and they include those people, but there are other people who are existing with a trust gap, right? They may be giving even at some level, but and maybe this is the diagnostic part of it. They're just not really moving forward. They're not kind of engaging more deeply. They're pretty stagnant, and it's just very superficial for them. And if you're wondering, like, if your church feels stuck at a certain depth, or the groups feel that way, maybe this conversation can help explain it. Um, let me give you some context behind this, because I don't want you to hear this as a critique of your character or your calling. That is not the problem here. This is really a cultural issue. It's a cultural shift, and you inherited it. You didn't create it. If we go back in time, let's say 30 years, right? I don't know. I don't have the exact date, but about 30 years ago, okay? Trust was actually associated with a lot of titles. Think about this, right? 30 years ago, you were the pastor. And if you were a pastor 30 years ago, that was actually enough. You gained trust because of the title. In a very similar way, it's the same way like a doctor, or back then too, a teacher, a police officer. Certain roles just came preloaded with public confidence. And those individuals with the title didn't necessarily earn it, they inherited it because of the title. And you don't need me to tell you, that world is gone. And what has replaced it is something that social researchers call expressive individualism. Actually, expressive individualism is what kind of replaced or created this trust gap. And the simple version of it is this, right? Expressive individualism, this you do you kind of, you do you, boo, like this kind of mantra, right? And on the surface, it doesn't sound terrible, but it is loaded with implications that have stair-stepped its way to creating some real cultural problems. Here's just a few things. Because of it, institutions, for the most part, are now suspect. Authority is questioned until it's proven. So there's no benefit of the doubt anymore with individuals or with organizations. Personal experience has become the dominant measure of truth for most people, right? So what is true to you, right? That's how this individualistic culture kind of unveils itself. And so when you think about it, your church didn't just kind of get skeptical of the government or media or corporations. They got skeptical of everything, including you, including your church. So I don't want to suggest that they're wrong for this. This is just the world that they have inherited. It's the world that they are growing up in, or have at least been engulfed in. So many institutions, right? Think about this, have failed so many people that having a level of skepticism is kind of understandable. And I think this is especially true in the pastor space, in the church space. Again, governmental institutions, organizations, companies. We've seen so many things in the last 30 years. And because of social media and because of the way the news feeds go, it's so much more public than it used to be. I mean, back when I was a child, I'm 50, so back when I was a kid, you kind of only knew about the things happening in your neighborhood, your city, and I grew up in and around Atlanta. And so, maybe my purview was a little larger because of Atlanta, but if it happened outside of Atlanta, it had to be really significant to know about it. Now, we know about everything in every place, all over the world, if we want to. And it's often shoved down our throat whether we want to. So, just in the church space, forget all the other issues that we've watched in the corporate space, the marketplace, governmental space. Just in the church space, think about how many moral failures we have watched, how many church problems we've seen. Some significant ones, right? Harming of children. Gosh. And those things probably were happening 30, 40, 50 years ago, on some level at least, maybe on the same level, but they just weren't as public. So, because of that, combined with this individualistic, you own your own truth, it has changed the game for pastors and churches in a very significant way. And you cannot ignore this reality. So, if you're still leading your church, your ministry space, your team, and you're acting like trust is a default, if you are acting like kind of your preparation and your sincerity and your credentials, you like me have letters after your name, if you think that's enough to earn the room's confidence, you are losing people before you even open the Bible. And it isn't, right? It's not because what you're saying is wrong or theologically bad or none of that. It's just because trust doesn't live in the role anymore. The role doesn't come with trust, but it does live somewhere, and it lives in relationships. Here's kind of where I really want to push a little bit and challenge some of us, because instinctually, at least, I see this in pastors all the time who sense something is off, right? So the most common response is to go a little harder on content or tighter sermons or be more culturally relevant with your series or even with your dress. Whatever it may be. Up the production value, right? Bring in the guest speaker, upgrade the worship experience, more haze, more lights, or less haze, more lights. Again, all of these kind of superficial, if we're honest, upgrades that we think will solve the problem. And again, making the experience better, more relevant, whether that's more lights, less lights. Whatever it means, more drums, less drums. There's no theological conversation really in that, right? None of that is a bad pursuit, but none of that's going to solve this problem. Because trust, right? Think about this. It is not a content conversation. It's a relational architecture problem. You can think about it this way. People used to extend trust to expertise, like the doctor, the police, the teacher, the pastor. You were the expert back then because you were an expert on scripture, on theology, on spiritual life. So that expertise automatically gave you authority. But now, right, people extend trust to consistency, to proximity, and this is big, to demonstrated understanding. So a leader who has proven over time that they actually see what the people in the room are carrying. They're honest about what they are carrying. And they're not just talking about what they believe or what people need to believe. It is belief in action, and it is in front of people. You know this. You can preach the best sermon of your life and walk out to a room that still isn't kind of sure about you. And if they're not sure about you, it doesn't matter how good the content is. And that isn't a preaching failure. You can't write a better message to fix that because it's a trust gap, and it doesn't get fixed, right, with better content. So how do you build it? And I kind of alluded to this earlier, but if trust is the problem, where does trust actually get built? And this is the part I want to sit in just for a few minutes with us, because this trust conversation in your church, or again, anywhere you're leading, it isn't happening or people aren't evaluating it after a sermon, right? Or after the experience. It's actually happening the weeks before Sunday, the days before Sunday, the small moments that I think a lot of us as pastors don't maybe think to count or at least see it as significantly as we should. Like these moments happen when you acknowledge what's going on in the world without flinching. It's consistency. When you stop performing certainty about things that honestly deserve more honesty. When people feel like you understand their actual life, not just the theological kind of dimensions surrounding it. I mean, think about it. Your people are not primarily asking if you are right, they're asking if you are real. And again, that is a significant change over time. Again, we don't have time in this conversation to unpack all this, but think about how the word authenticity gained such traction. If I recall, it was the word of the year a few years ago. Why is that? This is why. Because there was a trust gap forming, and it has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, right? It's a trust chasm now. And people are not looking necessarily for what's right. They want to find somebody who is real. And if they find a real person, they will trust it, trust the person, and then what they say can be right. I mean, think about it. Expertise claims authority, but trust earns it. And the earning, it isn't even dramatic. Right? It doesn't happen in this one big vulnerable moment or one raw sermon. That isn't going to gain the trust. It happens really through accumulation. It's these small, consistent movements where you showed up without an agenda to just prove that you were paying attention. And those moments, they accumulate, they compound, right? And here's kind of another piece to this puzzle. Most pastors, I think, default to proximity, we said is important, but I think we often think about proximity through programs. Like we set up a class, we create an event, we build a small group pathway, and I love discipleship pathways. That's a lot of what I do in my business. And listen, again, those aren't bad things. But if this the only way people get close to you is through this scheduled event with a registration link, you're too far away to gain trust. Programmatic proximity, what a fun word, right? Programmatic proximity is not the same as actual proximity. And the people, they can feel the difference. So, what do? We're going to talk about building again. You know me, I'm going to try to give you something super practical. So, let me give you kind of 3 adjustments that you can begin making. By the way, today, this isn't like something super complicated, but 3 specific things you can begin doing now that can close the gap of trust. And if you're not sure you need to, I would encourage you to really look around because it is a problem. Maybe with just the people showing up for the first, second, third time at your church, or maybe it's way broader than you actually know. So, 3 kind of concrete adjustments. And I would love for you to think about implementing these this week. Again, not next month, not next year. I think you can start with them now. And the reason is because they're not uber complicated to do. Okay, here's the first one. I would love for you to name what's in the room before you get to the text. Okay, so this is going to affect preaching some. So, and by the way, preaching is, again, I'm a preacher, so it's easy for me to say this, but if you think about a Sunday morning service, parking lot to parking lot, or whatever, or log on to log off, whatever your church people are doing. There's a lot of things that are important that are happening, and I wouldn't downplay any of them. The experience in the parking lot, the guest service experience, hospitality experience, the lobby, the check-in of children, all of that. Going into the room, what are the details around that? What's the music that's playing? What's the vibe in the room? I mean, the welcome, the worship set, the inspiration vision moment. All of these things matter. However, my thesis would be that they're all building towards one thing, and it is the sermon. That the message you're going to deliver, and not even the message in totality, but minute 58 of a 1-hour service, if you have an hour service, it's those last minutes that everything is building to. It's the application followed by inspiration. That's what we're building to, and it is the most important part to help people apply a biblical truth in their life. So I think the message is uber important. And if we had to choose, what is the most important part of Sunday morning, I would argue it's the message. So now everything else is important because it's building to that. But the message is the point. So this Sunday, before you open your Bible to deliver the message, acknowledge what the people in the room are carrying. And I don't mean this like therapeutically, not like a let's process our feelings kind of way. Okay, that sounded like I'm against feelings. I'm not, but my counselors have taught me over time it's good to feel. So I'm not against feelings, but I don't want to do this in a self-help way. I want you to think about it in a realistic way. So name the uncertainty that the people in your room that are listening to you are navigating. Show them that you live in the same world that they do. and that you are reading the same news, watching the same things, hearing the same things, that you feel the weight of the same cultural pressure they are feeling. Now, don't just make this stuff up and don't go grasping for straws here. If you're teaching a passage that has a cultural tension associated with it, which by the way, almost all of them do, just bring that specific cultural tension, pressure into the conversation before you get to the Bible and the principle that you're going to deliver. Connecting a real cultural tension to the truth you're going to deliver, it's interesting. Not only is it a better way to preach, okay, it also helps you gain trust because people realize, as we said earlier, you're real. You're living in the real world with them. And here's the other part of this, you don't have to solve that tension, right? That's not the point. The point is to prove that you see it too, that you're living it too. Because, a pastor who sees their people before they start preaching to them, you're going to build trust faster than the pastor who just delivers even excellent content. So that's the first one. Okay, here's the second thing. We got three. Second one, I would love for you to stop performing certainty that you don't have. Stop pretending that you have a certainty that you actually don't have. Listen, some things deserve full conviction, right? For instance, the resurrection, the reliability of Scripture, the grace of God. I think we preach those with incredible conviction, with lots of certainty. We should. However, right, if there are things that we just don't have a really good answer to, it's okay to say that. Like when the question that you're addressing on a Sunday is really complicated, I would love to just encourage you to resist the instinct to make it sound simple. Like when you are genuinely wrestling with something, admit that. Here's the deal. Certainty, right? Certainty you can't sustain is a trust debt that you haven't paid yet. When you act like something is simple, there's certainty around it, when you know that this is more gray than black and white. And let's just be honest, we love the black and white as pastors. It's just as people we do. Our brains are wired for clarity. So living in the gray can be challenging. But that is the world we live in. So much of life is gray. And if you don't have to say this out loud, but if you want to just have an honest moment with yourself and with me, right? Can we just admit that a lot of things that we were taught in seminary and our previous church experiences, or maybe that we've even convinced ourselves is black and white, isn't as black and white as we once thought? There is a lot, none of us are God, and none of us have cornered the market on absolute truth when it comes to every single topic imaginable. We just don't have that kind of clarity. And so when we act like we are kind of packaging complexity into these neat, tidy little answers with bows, people are going to pull back because they realize that their life is not that simple. And even if a truth is clear, the application of it sometimes can be very complex. So I think we have to stop kind of bringing their real questions and tidying them up with little simple answers. Okay, now that's a hard one to do, but you can start doing it. And it actually, and this is so crazy, when you act real about those things, when you say, I'm not certain, but here's what I believe God would do, here's what I believe God thinks, right? You think that you are reducing your trust, but you're actually growing it because you're being honest, you're being real. Pretending that you have certainty on everything that people are facing, it's not even, I don't know if it's sinful or not, but it definitely isn't great leadership because it's not honest. Now, here's the third one, last one. Isn't this fun? Here's the last one. I'd love for you to, and I mentioned this earlier, but get proximate before you get programmatic, okay? Alliteration, I love it. Get proximate before you get programmatic. I'd love for you to find 2 or 3 kind of informal moments this week, this month, as fast as you can, where you can just be present. And you're not there to present, you're not there to build an ask towards an ask, you're not leading anything formal, you're just there. A conversation after service that, goes longer than maybe you hoped or needed it to go. A coffee that wasn't on your calendar, like a moment where someone saw you and you just stopped. Listen, this is a hard one because, and I can tell you, a lot of you know, I was a lead pastor for 13 years. My very first day on the job, we had a couple hundred people, and $400 in the bank, by the way. That's my favorite little part of this. And, back then, when you got a couple hundred people showing up on a Sunday morning, and on your total roster, your active roster, hanging out, after service or, making yourself more available or whatever, I don't want to say it's easy, but it is a little less daunting. Now, I also had a very small staff. I only had a couple of people on the team. So, I was doing a lot of stuff. I was very, very busy, like you, if that's your situation. So I totally understand. But I will tell you, when our church grew and by the time I left, we were, having six, seven, 8,000 people on a Sunday. Our roster had grown at one point to 36 or five, I think, thousand people active on the roster. So, your availability can get so squeezed. And I'll tell you, I didn't do this very well all the time. Like I tried to show up in the preschool environments and elementary, middle school, high school environments, the college space, the groups. I would make some rounds and try to be intentional on Sundays when I could and whatever. But it just became very daunting to be in the lobby all the time before and after service and all the conversations and I'm a little more introverted by nature. So all of that stuff was so taxing for me. So over time, I kind of peeled away a little bit more probably than I should have for that. And in hindsight, I can tell you that I think I assumed that the programs that I was there for created plenty of proximity to me, and it wasn't the same. It was the moment where I was at dinner with our family and somebody stopped by and just wanted to say, hey, those moments really mattered. And it was easy to see those as annoying, but they really mattered. When you're just walking down the street in your town and someone comes up because they want to say hey to you and how do you respond in that moment, like for all of us, I think that can be a heavy weight to carry. This, everywhere you go, people are watching and they're critiquing and evaluating, and none of that's awesome. But it's a part of the calling, and it's a part of what the job demands. So, how can you not allow a program to be a substitute for actual proximity? Trust really scales through proximity, and it always has. When the room starts to feel your presence outside of the program, something really can shift in the church. Now, this is not necessarily hard stuff to do. It's can be challenging, and maybe you aren't fully bought in. But let's just think about as we kind of wrap up the conversation, what's going to happen in your church if you don't deal with any of this, or if you just assume there isn't a trust gap because there actually is one. What's going to happen? Well, I think this is what you'll notice. I think a lot of the people will still come. I think they'll keep showing up, at least, for a while, but they're always going to be holding something back. And they're going to stay a little guarded beneath the surface. And you know what? They're going to nod and they're going to tip a little here and there financially, or maybe a little bit with their time. They may even participate in a way that looks like engagement, but they're not really going to be fully present. They're not really going to open up. And when life gets genuinely hard, for them, when someone in the congregation, hits a real crisis, or their marriage is fracturing, or they're dealing with a diagnosis or whatever, they're not going to reach out the way that you hoped they would, and they're not going to have the baseline of faith that they need because they haven't been able to lean in, because they just don't have that trust yet. So you know what they're going to do? They're going to reach for something or someone that they do think they can trust. And I would love for that to be you. I think that God would love it for it to be their local church. And that's a real tragedy, But the tragedy isn't that someone may leave, it's that they stay and never go any deeper. That's the big tragedy here. And like a church full of people who are kind of physically present but not formed spiritually it's a mission that is failing. And I just don't think most pastors feel that until it's been true for years and years and years. And so the work here, right? The work you're doing is too important to lead without trust, or to lead on borrowed credibility. So as much as I can encourage you, start this week. Like, name something that people are carrying that's connected to the principle you're about to teach. Drop the performative certainty. Don't act like everything is simple. Show up in places where you're not, platformed to be there. Just show up because you want to be with the people God has called you to lead, to pastor, to mentor, to shepherd. And listen, those aren't soft leadership moments, right? They're the structural ones that change and compound over time. Hey, again, thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. If any of this landed with you, and or maybe you're just have more questions about trust and this new economy we're living in, I'd love to keep talking. You can always reach out to me. Email is gavin@gavinadams.com. A lot of you know this. I read every email that is sent to me, and I'll respond to you, and we can have a conversation. So shoot me a message directly, and of course, if you haven't subscribed, I'd love for you to do that too. We'll see you next time.